In this part, I will discuss antiarrhythmics in children. I'll be discussing about the cardiac action potential, the basics, how it propagates, how the antiarrhythmic drugs act, at what phases, and what are the common antiarrhythmics available, and what indications, what precautions you need to take in your day-to-day clinical practice. You can take this video as a review of the topic. Not everything is possible to be covered, but as of now, as of current time, most of the things that are depicted here are current. So let's go on. First thing is to what we need to understand is what is the cardiac action potential. Basically, it is a uh, transient, reversible, you can say reversible electromagnetochemical wavefront which is responsible for the generation of the impulse. It is based on a can say complicated series of transmembrane ion fluxes which ultimately result in a net flow of the electric current across the cell membrane, and most of it is because there is an unequal distribution of the electrically charged ions. So the inside of the cell membrane is negatively charged, and when it depolarizes, so it is negatively charged. As it depolarizes, the charge increases. So this is activity or this unequal distribution of the electrolytes across the lipid bilayer membrane is largely due to the activity of this pump, sodium potassium ATPase pump. So and lot of the ions like potassium, calcium, magnesium, they affect the activity of this pump. That's why they are also relevant and important in controlling the cardiac rhythm or the cardiac action potential. Moving on, there are two types of action potentials. A fast response type is basically dependent on the sodium channels, and this is found in the atrial, ventricular, and Purkinje fibers. So whenever suppose the ventricular and the Purkinje fibers are firing on their own, usually the response rate is very high. So you get a ventricular tachycardia. If the normal sino-atrioventricular conduction is disrupted, you get a very fast heart rate. And this slow response type of potential is found in the sinus and the AV node. It is more regular, and it is due to the uh, movement of the calcium channels across the membrane. So let's now look at the properties and the influences of on the action potential. Usually the SA node, as we know, have seen in the previous discussions, that SA node is the predominant pacemaker of the heart. It is usually the most excitable cell in the heart. So usually that's its excitability, or you can say automaticity, is the highest. So it overshadows the other parts like the AV node, bundle of phase, and all those areas. So it sets the pace of the heart. The acinodal cells usually they have a very unstable resting membrane potential, so they tend to get spontaneously depolarized, leading to this pacemaker potential. The initial activity or the initial movement is due to the fast sodium current, and there is a decrease in the conductance of the inward potassium channels. So usually when a threshold of around negative 55 millivolt is reached, the action potential begins. Initially there is fast opening of the sodium channel influx, and there is a T-type and the L-type potassium channels in the later phases. So and the slope of the action potential, as we see in the next slides, slope of the potential and the resting membrane potential, that determine the time necessary to reach the threshold. The sooner the threshold is reached, the sooner the action potential is fired, and the faster is the heart rate. And as we all clinically observe this, that sympathetic and parasympathetic stimulation affects the heart rate. How does that happen is because sympathetic stimulation increases the slope of the pacemaker potential and depolarizes the resting membrane potential. So ultimately this increases the heart rate. It also releases norepinephrine, which acts on the SA node through the beta 1 receptors, and ultimately it leads to increased cyclic AMP concentration and increases the rate of firing of the action potential. Parasympathetic stimulation is coupled to M2 receptors which decrease the decrease the cyclic AMP, and they oppose the positive chronotropic effect of the sympathetic stimulation, and it also releases acetylcholine, which lowers the overall pacemaker potential, hyperpolarizes the cell, ultimately reducing the frequency of the action potential. So let's now look at the phases of the action potential. There are 5 distinct phases. The phase 0 is the rapid depolarization phase, where due to sodium channel conformational change and sodium influx, there is a very fast depolarization, and slope of this phase 0 determines the conduction velocity. I will look at the figure in the next slides. The faster it increases, I'll just use a pen here. It's like this, and this. This slope, this is the slope. The faster it is, the narrower, more vertical it is, the faster is the conduction velocities, and some antiarrhythmics which act on this phase, like the phase 1, the class 1 antiarrhythmics, they decrease the slope of this phase and decrease the conduction velocity, reducing the overall rate of the action potential. And then there is a repolarization phase. Next is the repolarization. This whole phase is, after this depolarization, there is slow repolarization, where there is a gradual return to the resting. This is the baseline electrical activity here, so there is a gradual return to the resting membrane potential. So repolarization corresponds to phases of 1 and 3. This is phase 4, this is 0. This is 1, 2 and 3 here. We'll look at them more accurately later. So these phases are due to inactivation of the inward sodium current, and potassium and calcium channel activation causes the outward currents. They act in the later phases, and this whole determines the effective refractory period of the heart. Moving on, phase 4 again is spontaneous depolarization until the threshold potential is reaches. Sodium influx is triggered, and again you get transition to phase 0. So again, I think the figure will be coming soon. So there is divided into 5 phases, as we seen 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Phase 4 is the resting phase, baseline phase, resting membrane potential. Here the cardiac cells remain unless there is any further stimulation. Then there is, this is usually corresponds to the diastole portion of the heart. As soon as it's stimulated, you get the phase 0, which is the phase initial fast sodium channels and rapid depolarization. Here there is sodium channels are being driven inward, so there is fast change in the membrane current. There is a transient outward current of the chloride and the potassium channels, followed by phase 1. Once the depolarization has happened, you get initial rapid repolarization. Phase 1, there's the downward slopes happen. The fast sodium channels which had opened now close. So phase O and 1, or phase 0 and 1, they together corresponds, as you would have guessed, to the R and the S waves of the ECG. Because phase 0 is ventricular depolarization and phase 1 is initial repolarization. Before looking at the cardiac action potential again in more detail, how potassium and magnesium affect the action potential, it's very important, because it's very common cause of arrhythmia in children, critically ill children. So potassium levels affect the depolarization, repolarization and automation all. So change in the concentration of potassium will affect all these 3 mechanisms, especially the automation of the Purkinje fibers. Extracellular potassium is the main determinant of the resting membrane potential. Any decrease of potassium concentration, suppose it decreases to around a level of 2 milliequivalent per liter, this causes hyperpolarization. A further decrease to even lower levels, this is called cell membrane cytoplasmic membrane depolarization, so that the action potential will be generated will last even longer. and decreased potassium in the Purkinje fibers. This is the cause of increased automation, increased automaticity. So you can see how hypokalemia can predispose to arrhythmias. Phase 4 inward flow of the potassium. Phase 4 is the repolarization or the resting membrane potential phase. That is determined by the inward flow of potassium, and the channels which are doing this inward flow, they are dependent upon on the magnesium level. So that's how magnesium is important in this regard. And when you have hyperkalemia, increased potassium, it usually leads to quicker depolarization. There is a reduced sodium flow phase during the phase 1, and you get very fast depolarization. The membrane is very unstable, and magnesium infusion can inhibit. Suppose you are having some little bit of hyperkalemia, so magnesium acts like a stabilizer in that sense. It enhances the activity of calcium at the cellular level. Also, it inhibits some effects of hyperkalemia in the phase 1. In the next slide here, I've just taken one picture where you can see some common ECG changes of electrolyte imbalances. For moderately severe magnesium deficiency, if you have in here, you get a little bit of widening of the QRS and a peak T wave and tachycardia. If there is very severe magnesium depletion, you get the PR even gets also prolonged along with the QRS widening, which is here also, but you get even PR prolongation here, and T wave low or inverted can happen. Again with hyperkalemia, QR is widening in narrow peak T waves, and it's very commonly known that how hyperkalemia affects the ECG. If extreme hyperkalemia, you'll get sine wave and ultimately ventricular fibrillation. Hypercalcemia, you get a QRS shortened and a short QT interval, a large peak T wave. Hypokalemia, you see the T wave flattening and U waves and QT prolongation. Hypocalcemia, you see prolongation of the QT and a flat ST. Now let's look at the overall therapeutic overview of the antiarrhythmics, the common antiarrhythmics. Basically, we have the drugs which block the fast sodium channels. So there are sodium channel blockade. There is the beta adrenergic receptor blockade, the beta blockers, very commonly known and used also. You have some drug which prolong the repolarization. These are the phase 3 class 3 drugs. You have some calcium channel blockers, the phase class 4 drugs. Then you have two drugs which are not classifiable in this Vaughan Williams classification, which are adenosine and digitalis glycosides or digoxin. Adenosine, we have discussed a little bit about it in the past videos, I think. Yeah. So this was, we are discussing how the action potential manifests on surface ECG, how it can be correlated. So this is the phase 4 is the resting phase. Phase 0 is the depolarization, initial fast sodium currents. The initial uprise, this is the fast depolarization, followed by slow repolarization over these 1, 2, 3 and 4 phases. So here you can see in this diastole portion, the ventricles are in diastole, there is no contraction. Here there is a atrial contraction, atrial systole, and the 0 is closely followed by the upstroke of the Q of the R wave, followed by the S wave, which happens just after the start of the first phase, the initial repolarization. And this is also important because the classification of the antiarrhythmic drugs is basically based on their effect on the surface ECG. So we cannot really measure their effect and look at the cardiac action potential in real time. So their effect can be quantified or estimated by how they change these intervals, PQRS time, QRS duration, slopes, ST and all, and overall heart rate. So this is the broad figure of how the antiarrhythmics are classified. He has already discussed in detail phase 4 resting phase, this fast depolarization phase. So all the class 1 drugs are sodium channel blockers. There is some minor differences. 1A drugs which moderately increase the action potential duration. These are quinidine, procainamide. Class 1B drugs, they are weak depressors of this flow slope. So they decrease the action potential duration. Lidocaine, mexiletine, class 1C are strongly affect the action potential duration. These are flecainide, propafenone. These all are sodium channel blockers. The differences we'll discuss. Class 2 is beta blockers. So beta blockers act in various ways. We'll discuss all of them in detail. Class 3 is the potassium channel blockers. These are broad spectrum antiarrhythmics. For example, amiodarone is very strong. Although it is classified as class 3, but it has some other class 1 and class 2 actions as well. Class 4 agents are the calcium channel blockers, diltiazem, verapamil. Okay, some controversy is always there when we are regarding use of calcium channel blockers in younger children. So these the class 1 agents basically they block the rapid. We have seen they delay the upstroke action potential and primarily result in lengthening the QRS interval. So all these agents 1A, 1B, 1C they increase the QRS duration. So whenever we're starting this, the serial ECGs must be obtained, and we must closely look at the change in the QRS duration to quantify the effect of these drugs. So let's look at the class 1 drugs. So class 1A drug, they cause a moderate phase 0 depression. The class 1A agents are procainamide, disopyramide and quinidine. They delay the repolarization, result in action potential lengthening and longer refractory period. There is also some effect of the autonomic nervous system, for there is some anticholinergic activity also with these drugs, which results in increased sinus node activity and more rapid AV node conduction. So the ECG changes that you will see. So they prolong repolarization, increase the duration of action potential lengthening, and this includes quinidine, procainamide, and the ECG changes that we must look for is that we can see that is the widening of the QRS complex because of increased duration of action potential, prolongation of the QT interval. So these are useful in treating the atrial, ventricular and AV reentrant tachycardias. They all of the class 1A agents, they carry a risk of proarrhythmia because they can aggravate existing arrhythmias, or could be a development of a new atrial or ventricular arrhythmia. Sometimes torsades the pointus can be precipitated. So in patients who have structural heart disease or who have congestive heart failure, these drugs should be used under strict supervision, under cardiology guidance. So let's look at class 1B. They are the class 1A agents are, as we see, they're moderate phase 0 depression. Class 1B agents are weak depression, they cause weak depression of the phase 0. So they affect the action potential duration, but to a lesser extent. Medications here are lidocaine, mexiletine and phenytoin. They shorten the depolarization, they decrease the AP duration. So they do not increase the action potential duration, they decrease the action potential duration. And here we have lidocaine. This blocks sodium channel in the ventricular cells. Mexiletine, oral lidocaine derivative. Phenytoin also works as antiarrhythmic, although practical purposes always uses anticonvulsant. So they all shorten the duration of the action potential. They primarily used for the treatment of ventricular arrhythmias. Lidocaine, lidocaine is been historically for treatment of complex ventricular ectopy, VT, ventricular fibrillation. It can also be used for prolonged long QT syndromes, torsades de pointes. Lidocaine usually has no effect on the autonomic nervous system, so proarrhythmia is usually very rare, so it's very safe in that regard. Lidocaine is a good drug for ventricular arrhythmias, ventricular tachycardias. Mexiletine, oral drug used for chronic outpatients, so responsive to lidocaine. Class 1C agents are the strong depressors of the phase 0. They do not no effect on depolarization mostly. So as with class 1A and class C, they inhibit the sodium channels obviously, but they inhibit sodium channels in the fast response cells. They have a profound depressant effect on the conduction velocity. So how is the conduction velocity reduced? Because they depress the phase 0 depression. If you've reduced the slope, conduction that corresponds to conduction velocity. So as a whole, this group is used to depress abnormal automaticity arrhythmias, as we have seen the examples in the previous videos. Ectopic atrial tachycardias, multifocal junctional ectopic tachycardias. So these include the drugs here include flecainide, slows conduction in all parts of the heart, also inhibits abnormality, and propafenone slows conduction, and there's a weak beta blocker effect. Also, some potassium channel effect is also there. The thing with these drugs are they can decrease the abnormal automaticity, but they have a relatively high potential for arrhythmia. So there has to be caution. They can lead to arrest, especially if you have an underlying heart disease. So whenever an atrial arrhythmia is being treated with a class 1C agent, flecainide or propafenone, it is important to also use simultaneously some AV nodal slowing agent like a beta blocker or digoxin. Because what can happen is this class 1C agents can slow the atrial tachycardia by acting on the automaticity, reducing the automaticity, but they might just allow 1:1 AV conduction. What's happening in with ectopic atrial tachycardia, usually its rate is atrial to ventricular rate is more than 1:1. P to QRS is more than 1:1, as we have seen in the previous ECG analysis or rhythm analysis videos. So with this low the atrial rate, you might get a 1:1 AV conduction, which can lead to a more rapid ventricular conduction. So even further hemodynamic compromise may happen. Moving on, go to class 2 beta-adrenergic receptor drugs, beta blockers. Two major actions are sodium blockade of the beta-adrenergic receptors and direct membrane stabilization effect is due to some amount of sodium channel blockade. These include propranolol, causes both beta-adrenergic blockade and membrane stabilization, slows SA node, slows the automaticity, can block arrhythmia induced by exercise, apprehension. Other blockers like nadolol, atenolol, pindolol, sotalol, timolol, esmolol. Esmolol is a good drug in the ICUs because it's a short half-life and can be used for very fine control of tachycardia. So basically, various mechanisms of beta blockers: endogenous catecholamine release blockade, decrease autonomic sympathetic tone, slowing of spontaneous discharge from the SA node. Can be used to treat. These can be used to treat. They are all type of, you can say, broad spectrum. All arrhythmias of abnormal automaticity, catecholamine driven like JET, multifocal ectopic, flutter. So again, relative cardiac beta receptor activity, you can say among these drugs, atenolol is more cardioselective and less CNS penetration. Nadolol has less penetration of the brain other than beta blockers, so its CNS side effects are low. Carvedilol and metoprolol, they are approved in US for management of CHF in adults, not in children. And patients with chronic CHF who have increased sympathetic tone, they might deteriorate after you start the beta blocker therapy because you can affect their down-regulated receptors and all. So you need to be careful. Now moving on to class 3 drugs, the potassium channel blockers. They were developed because of the strong adverse effects of the sodium channel blocker drugs. They cause basically delay in the repolarization. So they increase the refractory period. So heart remains refractory for a longer time. Among these, amiodarone is a very common drug. It prolongs action potential by delaying the potassium efflux. There are very many other effects also of this drug. Ibutolide slows inverse movement of sodium, delays potassium influx. Betalium was first developed to treat hypertension, but it also suppresses the ventricular rate. Dofetilide prolongs the epiduration by delaying the potassium efflux. So by definition, as you see, they prolong the action potential duration through the action of the potassium channels. Amiodarone, sotalol have additional effects on the action epiduration, variable effects on autonomic nervous system. Here amiodarone is very commonly, you can say, can be used. It's a potent antiarrhythmic and it is usually reserved for life-threatening arrhythmias. It is incorporated in the ACLS and the pulse regimens for treatment of VT, unstable VT-VF not responding to the initial management. Also is used for JET, good drug for JET. The side effects of amiodarone are nausea, emesis, photosensitivity, some other rare like pneumonitis, liver toxicity, and all these things. Again, cardiovascular side effects are like diminished function, sometimes bradycardia, arrhythmia, sometimes rarely, not as much as the class 1C agents. Mm. So class 4 agents are calcium channel blockers. These are verapamil, diltiazem, these are common ones. They slow the rate of AV conduction in patients with atrial fibrillation. Verapamil blocks sodium channels in addition to the calcium channels. So also slows the SA node in tachycardia, diltiazem. So a little bit more, the verapamil calcium channel we have seen, they block the invert calcium current. So cellular activity, we have seen how it depresses SA node, slows conduction, prolongs refractoriness. They are used in many tachycardias. Verapamil is particularly useful in fascicular ventricular tachycardia, but in general they should be avoided in children less than 1 year of age cause of the risk of certain cardiac collapse. And patients with WPW, the AVRTs, where there is accessory pathway, you should be careful because they can enhance the antegrade conduction, leading to a particular increase in the ventricular response. Diltiazem is used for control of ventricular rate during diltiazem is used for control, can be used control rate during atrial tachy or atrial fibrillation. It can slow the AV conduction. Again, the risk of vasodilation is always there with these drugs. Now, the last two drugs which are not classifiable are among with this classification system are adenosine and digitalis. So adenosine, we have seen a little bit about it in the last two videos. It's an apurine nucleoside. Is useful very useful for as a AV nodal blocker. It's useful for terminating AV reentrant tachycardia. Utilizes the AV node as which are using the AV node. It blocks the AV conduction, so it can also be used as a diagnostic to differentiate between AV reentrant and automatic ectopic or supposed reentrant atrial arrhythmias. It terminates basically causing abruptly blocks the AV node. So if you are using it to diagnostic purpose, it will terminate the reentrant circuit. But atrial tachycardia, suppose it is there, it will persist with block at the AV node. So your ventricular response to the atrial response of less than 1:1 will be there. So whenever you're administering it, ECG and QRS monitoring should always be there. Only then we can establish the effectiveness or to unmask the underlying arrhythmia which is happening. Diagnostic use, metabolism, it can precipitate atrial fibrillation. If there is a pre-excited atrial fibrillation, it can enhance the accessory pathway conduction. Should be careful in that. Patients, theoretical line, patients with orthotopic heart transplant, they have a denervation induced supersensitivity to adenosine. So this medication should be avoided in this population if possible. A little bit about digoxin, used to treat arrhythmias and CHF. Slows the AV node. It reduces the automaticity. So there are multiple mechanisms of action. Specifically is used in treating AV reentrant tachycardia by slowing the AV conduction through the AV node. Also can be used to achieve and control the ventricular rate during an atrial tachy by slowing the response of the AV node. Because of its ability to decrease the automaticity, it may be used for atrial tachy, atrial fibrillation, or premature atrial complexes also. Mechanism is again increase in the vagal tone and decrease in the sympathetic efferent activity. Its cellular effects are due to binding of the digoxin to the sodium potassium ATPase pump. It paralyzes the sodium potassium ATPase pump. So you need to have a very maintain the potassium and the magnesium and the calcium levels when it is being used to avoid the toxicity. It should never be used or be avoided in patients with WPW because it can shorten the accessory pathway and effective refractory period. It can enhance the antegrade conduction and cause more hemodynamic compromise. Toxicity will increase the automaticity and trigger arrhythmias. Toxicity can result in almost any type of arrhythmia. The ECG signs of digestion toxicity are different in children as compared to adults. Infants more frequently present with sinus bradycardia as compared to adults. And AV block. Sinus bradycardia and AV block. These are the two manifestations of digitalis toxicity in children compared to adults. Children usually do not develop ventricular tachyarrhythmias like adults. So for toxicity, medication first of all should be discontinued and electrolyte should be corrected. Atrial or ventricular arrhythmia, suppose it's happening due to the toxicity, then you can use some drugs like lidocaine, ventricular stabilizer. Atropine or a temporary pacemaker can be used to treat brady or suppose AV block has happened. And again, the digoxin antibodies are always there to bind digoxin in such cases. So all in all, regarding the antiarrhythmic drugs, in medical pediatric ICUs, you don't see all the different peculiar types of arrhythmias. Common is sinus supraventricular tachycardias, or the life-threatening arrhythmia that we see ventricular tachycardias, VFib during CPR. You all know the pulse algorithms. So whenever using these drugs, we should be watchful of the potential adverse effects. Should always rule out the metabolic causes, electrolyte disturbances, because we have seen how calcium, magnesium, potassium are vital parts of maintenance of action potential. And all these drugs, they have very narrow therapeutic range, and they can be, some of them can be highly pro-arrhythmic, and the close monitoring is always needed. So thank you all for your time, and I'll see you in another video soon. Thank you.